We've been in a series of conversations in a message series that we're calling A New Way to Be Human, where we're looking at the Jesus way. What does it mean to actually follow Jesus, the Jesus way of living? And I want to jump right in and waste no time with that this morning, because this week we're going to look at what I would call the big idea of the Christian life, the major theme of the Jesus way. So Jesus is teaching, and this was a pretty common occurrence when he was here on earth doing the ministry of miracles, teaching and preparing the way to eventually go to the cross and conquer death just days later for all of us. And as he's teaching in this one particular moment, a lawyer steps up as he is in the crowd with a group of other religious leaders, and he poses a question to Jesus, and he's trying to trip him up. He was employing the very strategic lawyer tactics and trapping him with one type of question to follow up with another. And he's essentially asking Jesus, what's the most important thing here? What's the big idea of these commandments of God? And Jesus says what most of us have heard before. Maybe we've heard it even on a t-shirt, we've seen it on a bumper sticker, maybe it's in a church mission statement. And he basically gives them this big idea of loving God and loving people. And he says it like this. He says the biggest commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You can see it here. And love your neighbor as yourself. He goes on actually to say these two commandments, everything else is going to hang on this. In fact, everything else about the Jesus way, everything else about the Christian life, the Greek word there is hinges on. It actually hangs on these two commandments. And the interesting thing is when he says this is the greatest commandment, the word there, as it was originally written just a few thousand years ago, is the word megas, which you and I would get our word mega from. And I thought about that as I read that this week. I thought, when's the last time anybody ever used the word mega in a sentence with you? When's the last time you used the word mega in a sentence? Because it came up. It actually came up in our house last week. And I brought it up to my wife. She came home with some cereal, and the box was a mega-sized box. Now, I grew up, we didn't have much growing up, and we didn't know that, and we would eat the bagged cereal that was the off-brand stuff, and it was never sugary, ever. We were not allowed sugary cereal because my mom was just trying to stave off insanity, I think. She just was like, look, you're crazy enough without it. You're crazy with like bologna sandwiches. I can't imagine giving you Fruit Loops. So we didn't go that route. And when I was a kid, I can count on one hand the amount of times I had sugary cereal. I'll never forget, we were at a hotel and they had Lucky Charms. You know what Lucky Charms are? Okay, yeah. It's dessert for breakfast. It has marshmallows in it. Like it's a breakfast. It's crazy. And I remember I had it for the first time, and it was, I could have painted the house with a toothbrush. Like I was in it. And I remember in that moment, I said, when I grow up and I get a job and I get married, I'm going to buy Lucky Charms cereal. So as I did grow up, get a job, and get married, I, as a man, asked my wife if we could get Lucky Charms cereal because I'm not a stupid man and I know to ask. But because she loves us so much, she came home with a box of mega-sized Lucky Charms. That's the last time I remember seeing the word mega in a sentence. So as I read that this week, and I thought, Jesus is saying, this is the mega commandments. I'm just picturing serving him up like a big mega box of Lucky Charms. And he's telling them, look, this is the main idea. The big idea of the Christian life, the Jesus way, is, as we would probably synthesize that down, to love God and to love people. And so we're going to look at that this week. We're going to dive into that, the loving God part and the loving people part. Because when you think about everything hinging on this, it would be prudent for us as Jesus followers to know what that actually means. It goes beyond a catchy church mission statement. It goes beyond something we put on a sticker or on an advertisement for a church event. It goes straight to the core of who you are as a follower of Jesus. It is the mega theme of the Jesus way. So let's dive right in. What does it actually mean to love God? What does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength? You know what it means? It means pursuing God with everything, with the desire to please God and to honor Him with everything. Now that sounds lofty, and that's really hard to break down, but I would submit this to you as we ask the questions in our lives. Am I honoring God with this? Am I pleasing God with this? What we're going to do is we're going to measure every thought, every emotion, every feeling, every word, every action. We're going to measure that in light of our desire to please God and honor God. That means we're going to ask the question, do my thoughts honor God? Oof, we're already going there. Because we battle thoughts. You know why? You have a brain, it works, and it charges, and it brings stuff up, and sometimes those things do not honor God. Don't feel bad about that. That's how the human brain works. So what do? We have to filter that through what honors God. When we deal with certain feelings in our lives, do our feelings line up with our faith? Because all of us deal with some type of emotion at some point in our lives that is not going to be pretty if it were to be let out of our minds. You understand that? Like, we've all dealt with certain types of emotions that we're just hoping, please don't leave my brain and exit through my mouth. If you've been married for any amount of time, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes you have a thought, sometimes you have a feeling, and it escapes, and you're like, and you can't get it back, and it's already out there, and well, we've all been there, right? And then you get very familiar with what the couch pillows feel like. But for some of us too, there are these emotions that will tell us things that aren't true about ourselves. Something will happen to us and we'll start believing the worst things about ourselves or the true things about ourselves. Some of those emotions get incredibly heavy. Feelings oftentimes will tell us what our faith is really in. Because emotions will send us psychological text messages and they'll communicate things to us. And in those moments, we have to be willing to give those to God. I think sometimes we're afraid to give our feelings to God because we are ashamed of some of those feelings. Can I encourage you that God can handle the feelings that you're feeling? Not only that, He can handle them. Don't underestimate Him, but also He wants to help you with them. Because He's a good Father who we can run to, and He wants to comfort us when we feel those feelings. Don't keep your feelings from God, especially when those feelings start to reveal what your faith is really in. And if those feelings are sending you psychological text messages telling you that something else provides hope or something else provides truth, check that in light of your desire to honor God and what He says about the very thing you are feeling, and you might get the comfort you're looking for in the first place. We have to check everything, our words and our actions. Do your choices honor God? I mean, this feels like such a rudimentary thing, but really think about it. Our lives are filled with choices all the time. And when we make them, sometimes we just make them so quickly, but do we consider the consequences of our choices? Do we consider that our choices often impact other people, not just ourselves? Do your choices honor God? Here's one that I think everybody struggles with. Do your words honor God? Do you love God with your words? Whew, not always. Guilty. I mean, you can replace Look, you can replace words with thumbs at this day and age, right? We say a lot of things on the internet. It's really easy to say a lot of things on the internet and not care about the people receiving those things that we're saying or the people reading those things that we're saying. Can I give you something to help you love God with your words? Before you say something, ask yourself what God says about the things you want to say. Because if the things you want to say are in direct opposition to what God says about the things you want to say, do not say those things. Did you catch that? You can insert type right in there. Do your words honor God? Do they tear down or do they build up? Are your words filled with gossip? Are your words filled with junk? Or are your words filled with joy? Do they please God? Do they honor God? Do you love God in all of these areas of your life? If we're going to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, that's the mega commandment that Jesus says. If we're going to do that, it means that we pursue God with a desire to please Him and honor Him in every single area of our lives, when nobody's looking and when everybody's looking, and everywhere in between. And we desire to serve Him with all we are. We're pursuing God with all we are, and we're serving Him with all we are. And you know what happens when we do that? The interesting thing, He says these two commandments are what everything hinges on. What's beautiful here is that loving God produces a love for people. That our love for people is actually a result of our loving God. It is an overflow. If our loving God bucket is this water-filled bucket, we love God with everything we have, it fills up and it pours out into the way we love people. Not only is loving people an overflow of loving God, but loving people is actually a result of being loved by God. Think about that for just a moment. Really think about that. Loving people is an overflow of loving God. It is an overflow of our loving God. But loving people is a direct result. It is a response to God's love for us. Paul says it in the New Testament of your Bible. He's writing to Timothy and he tells him, don't be ashamed of this. It's so full in me that I can't help but give it away. Think about what it means to really love people. As Christians, we like to toss that phrase around a lot. Oh, we're a Christian, we love people. We're a Jesus follower, we love people. But do we really, and do we really even understand what loving people is the result of, what loving people actually looks like? Loving people means you cannot get over what God has done for you and it just spills out of you. Loving people is when you realize that the grace that you've been given so generously by God, that's the same grace that God gives the other person. And when you are consumed by that love that God has given you, you can't help but let that pour out of your lives. So loving people looks like this: seeing people the way God sees people, and treating people the way God sees people. That's what loving people looks like. And Jesus actually tells a story to illustrate this. It's in the Gospel of Luke. It's the third book in your New Testament. You can find it on your phone. You can turn there in your actual Bible, or you can follow along on the screens. Jesus is going to be sharing a story that even outside of the Christian arena, people have heard of. And it is a story commonly referred to as the story of the Good Samaritan. You've heard it before. You're familiar with it. But there is an illustration here that Jesus provides, and He is going to teach in this moment what loving people really looks like. What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? Because He just has this conversation with this lawyer. He explains to him these two mega commandments. Everything hinges on it. And he asked the question, so then who is my neighbor? How do I do this? And so Jesus goes into this. In Luke 10, we're going to be in verse 30. It says, Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho. Stop. For us, I say that no one bats an eye. If you're in the moment a few thousand years ago and you hear Jesus open a story like that, it has immediately grabbed your attention. I'm going to give you an example that most people will understand. If you were to turn on a Star Wars movie, what happens at the beginning of the Star Wars movie? Bam! And you get the thing that rolls up, right? The credits that roll up. Immediately in that moment, if you are a Star Wars fan, you have been filled with nostalgia. In this story, what Jesus is doing here is he says a Jewish man traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho. Anyone listening to that story right then was immediately hooked, because what Jesus actually just said to them was, a Jewish man was traveling on the way of blood. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho had been coined with this moniker, the way of blood. It started here at elevation, and it came here, and it lowered in elevation, and it had twists and turns, and it was miles and miles long. And not only did it change in elevation, it changed in climate. And so it would get drier and drier and drier, and so there would be these twists and turns where people traveling down it would have to stop and hydrate. And what would happen is it was used for commerce. People would travel and bring goods to certain places. And so as a result, robbers, marauders, thieves, bandits, what they would do is they would camp out on these different parts, because there would be secluded slots in this road. And they would hang out, and when people would stop to kind of hydrate or rest in this arid climate as they were on this long journey, these bandits would rob them, and they would beat them. And so this road became known as the way of blood. It was, don't go that way. Don't go that way. And if you do, be prepared. So everyone listening to this story, in the Good Samaritan story that he's about to tell, he starts with a Jewish man was traveling down the way of blood. And everybody listening says, what? And he goes on. The man was attacked by bandits. And what happened? They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him up, and they left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road, and he passed him by. Then a temple assistant, a ministry leader, a ministry worker, walked over, saw him lying there, and then he passed also on the other side of the road. And this is when Jesus just completely blows their minds in the story. In verse 33, then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine, and he bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day, he was there overnight. He handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, look, take care of this man, and if the bill gets higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. And Jesus asked, now which one of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by the bandits? And the man said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, now go and do the same. Jewish people and Samaritans hated each other. I don't say that like sports fans hate each other. This is not Michigan, Ohio State. This is not Duke, UNC. I would name a San Diego sports rival, but let's be honest. Yeah, we can just kind of leave that at that, right? They hated each other. This was about 700 years before Jesus was born. The people of Israel, the Jewish people, were broken into 2 separate kingdoms. We can call them North and South. And essentially what happened is one of those kingdoms was invaded by a group called Assyrians, and they took over. They came in, they conquered, and they took everything over. And so half of the Jewish people were now a part of a new kingdom of, essentially the word would be pagans, non-Jewish, non-God-following people. And so, as would be the case in any type of conquering culture, the new conquering community set up a new way of doing things, and their way of living became the way of living. And so what happened was the Jewish people living in that kingdom now, they started to just naturally do what happens when you assimilate into a culture. They started doing the things non-God following people did. In fact, Jewish people called anybody who was not Jewish a Gentile. It was a bit of a derogatory term, and it just meant non-Jewish. You don't fear God, you don't honor God, you don't follow God, you don't serve God. But as time would go by, the Jewish people in this community, they started to adopt the ways of the Assyrians. They started to adopt the ways of this pagan group who had conquered and set up a new civilization. And what ended up happening is as time went by, they started worshiping other gods. They started believing in different things, practicing different things, ignoring and neglecting other things. And what ended up happening is time goes by, you want to procreate, you want to continue your life, you want to continue your line, and they started marrying non-Jewish people. And what happened is the southern kingdom of Israelite people saw that this was happening from a distance. They knew of this as it was happening. And what they did is they looked down on them so much for doing that the other group of Jewish people called this new group. You had this Assyrian conquering pagan group who took over the people of Israel, these Jewish people. And eventually when these Jewish people married these Assyrian people, that blended group they called Samaritans. It's a little wild to think about because in our day and age, it's not uncommon to marry somebody who's not from where you're from. It was this outsider thing that the Jewish people started calling Samaritans products of mixed marriages. Now, for you and I, that doesn't sound like a big deal because if you're from California and you marry somebody from Texas, it's not a big deal, right? You're not from here, we marry, okay. Like my brother, he married a gal from the United Kingdom. She's from London. My uncle was born in Fortaleza, Brazil. This is not like an uncommon thing. But at that time, for the Jewish people, this was a big deal. And so the Samaritans now, who had Jewish lineage, were hated by the southern kingdom. And about 100 years later, that southern kingdom gets conquered by a new group of people. And that group said, hey, we know you guys have been separated. Let's all come together. You guys can bring all your people back together. It's fine. We want to conquer everything. So now the Jewish people have an opportunity to all be brought together. And that southern kingdom said, no way. We don't want anything to do with those Samaritans. They actually looked at them as worse than, quote, regular Gentiles. When I say they hated each other, they hated each other. Because then the Samaritan says, well, if you don't like us, then we don't like you. You don't know what we went through. You have no idea. Then we hate you too. You're arrogant. You're pompous. You're pious. We don't want anything to do with you. And they said, great, because we've wanted nothing to do with you for forever. And all of a sudden, you've got this Jewish version of Hatfields and McCoys. And they're shooting at each other and they don't even know why. It's the old Andy Griffith Feud episode. They're like, why are you doing this? We don't know. Because they're Samaritans. Why? Well, I mean, my granddaddy's told me this. And they hated each other. There is old Near East ancient literature that indicates certain Jewish rabbis told the people, if a Samaritan woman is giving birth and needs assistance during childbirth, do not help her, because that would result in another Samaritan being brought into the world. When I tell you they hated each other, I mean to the very core of hating each other. So Jesus says, a Jewish man was traveling down the way of blood, and as a result of this, was beaten up, robbed, and left half dead. So a priest came along. That's looking good. And what did the priest do? I don't want any part of that. Then a temple assistant came along. A ministry worker came along. I don't want to do with it. Then he says a despised Samaritan came along. Now you've got some context as to just how deep the hatred was between this group of people. So understand the gravity of the love displayed. How did the Samaritan love this man? The Samaritan first saw him and saw the value in the Jewish man. You know what the Samaritan did? Because this is going to tell us a lot about how to love people. The Samaritan looked past the label. The Samaritan looked at the man and didn't see a Jewish man. He saw a man. He saw a person, an imperfect, flawed person just like you and me. Can I tell you guys? Loving people the Jesus way tells us to look past the label when we love people. Because we have found it very easy in our society to label people, and those labels keep us from loving them. Because it's hard to love people who look differently than you do sometimes, who think differently than you do, who talk differently than you do, who vote differently than you do, who hold opinions that differ from yours. Here's a stinger. It's hard sometimes to love people who sin differently than we do. But the Jesus way of loving people looks past the label, because the Jesus way of loving people sees people the way God sees people. This despised, hated, feud-driven Samaritan saw this man and saw the value in him. And what did he do? He went over and he had compassion for him. And he said he soothed his wounds with oil and wine, and he bandaged him up. Now let's have some real talk about loving people, though. Okay? Because it's easy for me, right? Because that's a cool internet clip. Ooh, loving people, look past the label. That sounds really cool and really smooth as a preacher, and that's inspiring. But let's have some real practical talk about loving people, too. Okay? Here it is. Notice the Samaritan man did not ignore the injuries of the Jewish man. Now, it has become very popular. Very popular. And to help you, it's been this way for a long time. We just have the internet now, so it tells us more often. But it has become very, very popular to create various definitions of love. And we now are in a society that says loving people means supporting every choice they make, even if that choice does not honor God or help them know God better. That loving people means ignoring the brokenness of people. That is not what Jesus highlights in the story of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan man did not ignore the injuries of the man. He felt compassion for him, and he cared for them. Love does not ignore the injuries of others. Love does not look past the brokenness in others. Love recognizes the brokenness in others, feels compassion, because love is coming from a place where it is housed by another broken person. And love knows that this grace that God freely gives us is something we cannot get away from. And so we recognize, because we are one, from one broken person to the next. And so love is willing to have compassion and care for the brokenness and speak truth in love, to challenge with godly character, to caution with gentleness and respect. Because understand something that we just saw. Love does not ignore the injuries, but love does not create more injuries. Loving people with grace and truth is what we see here, that there is reality and compassion. Sometimes we love people under the guise of bashing them for what they're doing. And instead of caring for their injuries, we're just creating more because they don't feel any love whatsoever. All they feel is judgment. Can I encourage you? Assessment and understanding is not the same as judgment. Understanding someone's brokenness means having compassion for them and moving towards them to care for their brokenness. Judging someone's brokenness is passing to the other side. That is not what Jesus highlights here when it comes to loving people. Because what happens is this: loving people starts to feel weaker and weaker if we don't strengthen it with truth. But assaulting people with truth starts to feel harsher and harsher if we don't soften it with love. The Samaritan man saw the Jewish man and what? Recognized the wounds and had compassion for him and gave and sacrificed. That's what he did. He had compassion. He bandaged him up. He put him on his own donkey and he took him to an inn. He paid for it. He stayed the night, took care of him, and then the next day went down to the lobby, rang the bell, and said, "If it gets higher, I'll Venmo you." Some of you got that because you do the Venmo thing. That's what he did. What a powerful picture of love. You know why it's so powerful? Nobody saw it coming. And it highlights what Jesus did for us. Jesus did not ignore the injuries of mankind, but he had compassion. He said, "You cannot get to me. You are broken, and you are," to use the phrase, "lost without me. So here's what my love looks like." So if you're going to love people as an outpouring of my love for you. And my love for you looks like this. So your love for people should look like this. No one was expecting this in this story. No one listening to the story of the Good Samaritan was expecting him to introduce a hated Samaritan into a story that was supposed to center and circle itself on loving your neighbor. They were expecting him to say, "Then another Jewish man came along." No, the priest ignored the man in need. Then the ministry worker, the temple assistant, ignored the man in need. But a despised Samaritan came along. Do you know what Jesus is teaching about loving God and loving people in this moment? Specifically loving your neighbor as yourself. He's teaching this: the Jesus way does not pick a side. It takes over. The Jesus way of loving people recognizes that God is the one who made everything and deserves everything, and that people are the ones to whom God gave everything for. So what does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself? What does it mean to pursue this mega theme of the Jesus way? It is recognizing that God deserves everything and gave everything. So our response is to pursue him with everything. And as we do that, he fills us up with this ability to love people the Jesus way. To see people the way God sees people and treat people the way God sees people. That's the mega theme for the Jesus way. Let's pray and we'll continue to sing. God, thank you again for your word. Thank you for this story, Jesus, that you told, how I think it's so easy because, God, I know I have my Bible and I've got several versions of it. I've got it on my phone, just like everybody else here. We all have the internet. We can look it up. And we've lived our entire lives with this complete picture of the Bible. But to even just pause and recognize that 2,000 years ago, Jesus, you told a story that we would be talking about here on this day is marvelous. It is actually marvelous, God, that your word would just continue to penetrate through history and through time. So God, we thank you for that. God, as we receive this mega theme for the Christian life, as we receive this big idea for the Jesus way, God, I ask you to help us, stir in us, to measure every thought, every feeling, every emotion, every word, every action, to measure all of that in light of our desire to please you, of our desire to honor you. That as we dig into this and as we pursue you with everything, God, that you would remind us at every turn. And God, even this week, that you would give us those moments of reminders and opportunities to love our neighbors as ourselves. Give us opportunities to see the value in people, to have compassion for people, to care for people, to give sacrificially, to help people, to speak truth in love to people, all as an overflow of our love for you. So that as we love people, those people would see your love through the way we love. And that we would return to that mega theme of loving you with everything we have. And loving others because of how we've been loved by you. God, I pray this in your name as we build on this as followers of you, Jesus. Amen.